Ghanaians will be heading to the polls to vote for a new president and members of parliament for the next 4 years. Ahead of that crucial vote, it's rather important to talk about election security, tackling misinformation, and as well as fact-checking, which is very crucial to ensure the integrity of our electoral process. Today on Election Desk, I have here with me Dr. Kafui Tsekpo, and he's a research associate with the African Leadership Center, Nairobi, and we'll be talking about election security, tackling misinformation, as well as fact-checking. Doc, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you for having me. How are you too?
I'm doing very well. I know you're a very busy man, so it's very good to have you in the studio.
Well, for God and country.
Great. So what would you make of the current dynamics as we head into the 2024 elections?
Well, every election, since the foundational election of modern Ghana, right up to this, and when I say foundational elections of modern Ghana, right from the plebiscites that led to the independence election, the elections of 52 and then 54 before finally Ghana gained independence in 1957, through to present day, the 2024 election, which is just about 30 days away, have all had their different dynamics. And so it is important to look at that or to consider that when you are looking at election dynamics. But most importantly, under the Fourth Republic, we've also not had the same kind of dynamics since 92. 92 was foundational for the Fourth Republic. The dynamics were quite different, given that it was on the back of long period of non-elected governance in this country. Non-elected in the sense that we didn't have the president and his immediate assigns elected. But then in 1986, 87, thereabout, we held the district assembly elections, which was a form of governing from below in a participatory manner. But the 92 elections was when we began, we retransitioned again into having elections at the national level, where we elect our president and parliamentarians to govern for a period of time or a fixed term of 4 years. That election was different. It was foundational in the sense of it being the election that kick-started the Fourth Republic. 96 presented a different dynamics from 92, where in 92, it was largely the then ruling National Democratic Congress that was in firm control of affairs with a very, isolated opposition. In 96, the dynamics changed. The political landscape opened a bit more, opened in the sense that many people began to evaluate the options available and began to seek alternatives. And so the then largest opposition party in terms of the New Patriotic Party began to look more appealing to a cross-section of Ghanaian voters, and that would culminate in their eventual winning of the elections in the year 2000. That 8-year period gave Ghanaians another opportunity to now have a firm understanding of what each of the now two leading political parties have or portend for this country, and what they make out of it in terms of their electoral choices or voter decisions at the polls. And we have seen that manifest in the election results of 2012, 2016, and 2020. Going into the 2024 elections is going to be a similar thing. Most importantly, people are going to base their decisions on their ability to actualize their aspirations as individuals. And this is shaped mainly by political decision making in the country and how that affects economic outcomes, economic issues, being how the economy is able to allow individuals, citizens who are engaged in legitimate businesses, citizens who are engaged in legitimate acts as is enshrined in the Constitution or as is allowed by the Constitution, to be able to make, I wouldn't say profit, but to be able to make adequate
Some
living,
gains.
make livelihood easier for them, make livelihood what it's meant to be, that people can actually see progress in their income status, see progress in their livelihoods. People can be able to have an assurance that over their life course, over their working years, they can actually see progress in their lives, and they can retire happily, having worked and having worked
Have a
and
decent
received
living.
the fruits of their labor
Okay.
in ways that are satisfying.
Great.
Yes. So I think for this particular election, the main dynamics or the main issues that are going to shape election outcomes, all other things being equal, would be economic issues and political or governance decision making.
Great. Great, Doc. So you've touched on some of the sentiments that you are witnessing for now, but let's come to misinformation. You know, every election cycle has its own issues that it comes with. We tend to often have misinformation, disinformation, and all of that. How significant is this going to impact on this particular election cycle, just as it has in previous ones?
Well, misinformation, in the first place, comes through diverse channels. And it has always been part of us. Some people would want to refer to misinformation or disinformation as propaganda. Mind you, propaganda in itself is not a negative thing. The origin of the concept was to prosecute a particular agenda in a manner that aided a particular cause, not in a negative sense of using false information or statement. Prior to the proliferation of social media, when the media landscape in Ghana, for example, liberalized, there were a bit of misinformation. There were instances of misinformation where even traditional news outlets will report of an issue that has happened. I'll give you a very funny one. We heard about the Utongbas rape saga on the Tamale something road some time back. That was a classical case of
propaganda.
Misinformation. But almost all traditional news outlets, and during that time we didn't have the proliferation of social media. Almost all traditional news outlets had carried that information extensively. It became topical. Even security experts had to be brought in to discuss the issue. But to date, I mean, there's still no record of any such incident ever having happened in this country. That's a classical case of misinformation that has nothing to do with social media. But given the age of social media, misinformation can happen or does happen in terms of how politicians, how political actors going into the elections would want to change the mind of voters, would want to influence how voters perceive a particular candidate or other. And you can see that, for example, with how statements and utterances of leading political actors, being it in the opposition or in the governing party, are twisted and used extensively. So, for example, they can take the template of any of the leading media houses, be it GhanaWeb, and then put an inaccurate or fake information on it,
and circulate it very widely as well.
Circulate it very wide. And I always tell people that fact-checking is not foolproof in itself, in the sense that how many people would have seen that and formed a decision about it? There is no guarantee that the same crop of persons who saw that misinformation would see the, the fact-checked version and use that to correct whatever impression they might have formed out of that, which means that the damage would have already been done. And so there is misinformation going on, and especially with the high stakes regarding this particular election, it's going to be even worse, especially in the 48 hours before and after election. That is to the polls, and then the 48 hours whilst we are waiting for results to come through. All these things are going to come out because people are going to churn out all manner of information out there, seeking to either elicit the attention of voters or the general public, caught their disaffection or affection for one party or the other. And for me, this doesn't portend well for the integrity of our elections and electoral processes.
Very well said, Doc. You know, a couple of years ago, social media wasn't what it is today. Today, we've seen different dynamics. We have various social media platforms, X, Facebook. What crucial role would some of these social media platforms play, particularly with disseminating information to people, whether be it misinformation, disinformation, and even accurate information as well?
Well, I mean, that is a given, that they play a crucial role. There are people now who resort to either TikTok or Snapchat for their information. The advent of those people, you call them influencers, for example, have become, for the lack of a better adjective, alternative sources of information. Instead of people going to the traditional media, be it the print or the audio or the audiovisual, people will decide to go to YouTube, for example, to watch what an influencer. Don't forget that these influencers add their own commentary, and these commentaries might not in themselves be a true reflection of whatever the issues are. But then that is what has become the norm of the day. So it is important that these people are cognizant of their actions, how it portends on the national security of the country, and more specifically on election security. Because if there is an information, for example, even if you have multiple sources saying X or Y, it is not in your place to put your own understanding to the issue. You can only do that after there is ample information out there for everyone. And in any case, I mean, being a social media influencer doesn't make you an expert, an authority on a subject matter or an issue. Yours, perhaps, at best, is just to relay the information and leave it as such. Whatever people make out of it, it's a different issue altogether. So for me, I think these influencers must be mindful. Given that there are new laws, especially national security laws, that prohibits, that frowns on giving false information, we will be very mindful of that and make sure that we do not churn out such inaccurate information that are likely to affect the integrity of our electoral process and the outcomes of the general elections.
So, Doc, I've been having a very interesting conversation. I just want to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking about election security and some foreign vulnerabilities as well. So Dr. Kafui Tsekpo is my guest on this edition of Election Decks on GhanaWeb TV. We've been talking about election security, tackling misinformation, as well as fact-checking. We'll be right back. Welcome back on our break on Election Decks on GhanaWeb TV. I am Maoli Aholimeka. My guest is still Dr. Kafui Tsekpo, and he's a research associate with the African Leadership Center, Nairobi. We've been talking about election security, tackling misinformation, as well as fact-checking. Doc, I was having a very interesting conversation with you. You're talking about social media and all of that. Now let's move to the real issue, which is election security as well. Going into this particular elections that we have on December 7th, what measures do you think should be put in place to ensure that the integrity of our elections is very secure?
Well, I mean, in the Fourth Republic, election security has been on two scores. One has been the physical protection of the election materials and the immediate space of where the voting takes place. And so that is why during election days, security personnel are deployed to either accompany the electoral materials or at the polling stations where actual voting takes place. That is one aspect of election security. The other aspect of election security that goes to the core, the sanctity of the electoral process is about stakeholder engagement. And you would realize that prior to the last couple of years, we we had IPAC as the
Yes.
main avenue through which stakeholder involvement goes. Because that is where the real security takes place, where you are able to instill confidence. All parties to the elections are involved in the decision-making process as to how the electoral process must run. They are involved in the decision-making process as to what issues or what processes must be put in place to ensure that the electoral process runs smoothly. This decision, having been taken collectively by all parties, is the surest way of guaranteeing the electoral sanctity or the sanctity of the electoral process in this country. Now, when you move past that and you are unable to breed cooperation at that level, it raises a lot of doubts, and that doubt breeds insecurity.
We've actually seen with some of the parties contesting this particular election, they're raising some issues there as well.
Yes, which is very cool, because see, voters go to the polls to elect, but given that we operate a liberal democratic dispensation where mostly electoral competition is based on party system, where parties mobilize based on identity, based on basis, based on, and this identity could be anything. It could be youth, it could be religion, it could be ethnicity, whatever. It is very important that you put in place measures where these primary stakeholders, so there are two forms of primary stakeholders: the contestants, the political parties, the individuals, and then the voters. So these are the two primary actors in the electoral process. But then the first of the primary actors are the parties and the contestants, being it independent candidates or otherwise. It is very important to instill confidence in the process from that aspect. That, in a way, has a correlating effect on voters' own confidence in the process. Because at a stance, voters are also politically aligned. And how their parties communicate to them
is also very
important. So if their parties have full confidence in the electoral process, and that is transcended to their members who form the core of the electoral base, that in itself calms tension, gives an assurance or gives a measure of assurance, and people are able to fly with it. Now, if that is not done, then we have a recipe for disaster. That is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is also when even the so-called non-aligned voters or the floating voters or the independent voters,
the special 5%,
very good. It also instills some form of confidence, so that if they go to cast their ballots on elections day, they have assurance that whatever decision is it that they are taking is indeed that is what is going to reflect. But then when that assurance is missing, we are on a time bomb,
and especially see some of the issues pop up.
The disputes and the conflict arising, and especially when the stakes are very high this time around for our election. No party is really in a commanding lead. Already they are split in the middle in parliament. That in a way shows the measure of their strength in the various constituencies, right? Because the elections cover the 275 or so constituencies, and if they are split in the middle, it tells you that that is a measure of one way of measuring their strength across the country. Now, beside that, it is important that the Electoral Management Institution,
which is the EC,
which is the Electoral Commission, and its assigns are sensitive to the national security of this country by ensuring that whatever processes, whatever actions, decisions that they are taking is in the paramount interest of the country and no individual. I repeat that because we have gotten to a stage where we have introduced a number of electronic processes. And we all know that electronic processes in themselves are not foolproof. They are subject to manipulation. These manipulations can happen at different stages of the process. It is very important for the EC to assure the general public, the voting public, and the contestants in the election that whatever system they are putting in place are safe, can be authenticated, can be audited, and can guarantee a smooth transmission of voter results and an accurate collation of results to determine the true winner of the general and parliamentary elections.
Great, Doc. Very interesting points that you've made there. But let's come to foreign influence. We know every election, there are personal interests and there are also some external, both domestic and external as well. How do you think we can tackle some of these vulnerabilities should they rear their head, coming particularly in the 2024 elections?
Well, I mean, we've always had some form of external
foreign
influence in our elections. A lot of it is not very obvious,
okay.
and so I wouldn't have evidence to back, even though there might be anecdotal narratives around. The obvious, which you might not really call it influence, but are the foreign election observers who come in. Sometimes their opinions or decisions as to, oh, we have monitored the election, it is credible, it is free and fair. It's a form of interference, and in a sense that at the end, even though citizens of that country may have issues with the process, an external entity would come and tell you that, no, we think that the process is fair. I don't think that in itself augurs well for building or consolidating our democratic practice in this country. That is one form of it. As I said, the other forms are not very obvious in the sense that, I mean, even campaign financing is a form of election interference.
Yes.
And we know that our two leading political parties are very capable of sourcing finances from elsewhere.
External sources.
Yes, external to the jurisdiction of this country. That is a form of influence. Another form of influence is that, I mean, almost all the traditional media houses pick their foreign information or their foreign news from the established media houses, the external ones, right? Be it BBC, whatever. CNN. So whatever misinformation that CNN or BBC, I mean, those organizations are not foolproof from churning out misinformation or inaccurate information. And once we rely on them, the France International, the DWs, the Al Jazeera's, the CNN, the Fox, and all those, the Associated Press, once we rely on them, we are vulnerable in that sense because we don't even have the means by ourselves to cross-check and ensure that whatever it is that they are saying about our elections are accurate. And you would bear with me. Your media house published recently when national security had to come out to debunk a report by the Reuters news agency that there were elements of Burkinabe jihadist element in this country. Well, we don't have the kind of information national security has, but to the extent that that is the only avenue through which we as citizens can verify or the government, we can get news from the government as to what is happening. That it tells you that these foreign entities may not in themselves be churning out the right amount of information or the level of information that is accurate to the issues that are happening on the ground. And to this extent, if during election time we have them, because they also churn out information on the go almost every minute thereabout. And if it happens that way during election period, and as I said, the 48 hours to and after the day of elections are very crucial. And during this period, if this thing should happen, we might likely see ourselves in some form of a crisis.
Great. So, I mean, we're hoping we don't have to have any crisis right there. But I just want to touch down quickly on voter education. We have about 18.7 million voters on this particular register. That's what the EC has told us so far. Going into this particular election, what do you make of the voter education? We have a lot more young people who are expected to participate in this election. What do you make of the whole voter education with this particular election?
Well, to be able to have a fair sense of the voter education, you first must look at the voter trends. Both NDC and MPP, who are the leading contenders to this particular election, have a certain core. The MPP mainly has its core in the eastern, among the Achim areas, the Achim, Ekwapim, Kwahu areas of the eastern region, and then also the Ashanti region, the Akan-dominated areas of the Ashanti region. These two regions give the bulk of the votes to the MPP. Also, in the northern region, the Dagomba areas are also one of the strengths of the MPP.
Yeah.
However, the NDC most often draws its strength from across the country. I mean, so it is more like a multi-ethnic party, or it has a broad-based appeal, unlike the MPP. But it doesn't mean that the MPP doesn't have inroads in those other geographical areas or regions. Now, what is happening now, what I can foresee now from the publicly available data, is that there is a lot of youth interest in this particular election. A lot of first-time voters are particularly non-aligned, and this means that the urban areas in this country,
which is those in Accra,
Kumasi, Sekondi, Takoradi, to some extent you can add Tamale, because it is one of the fastest growing urban spaces in this country, and maybe Koforidua, Eastern Region, and the whole areas.
Those are also emerging as
fast developing urban settlement. These places would have a lot to say in terms of how the youth vote in those areas go, the trend in which they take. So far, when it comes to voter education, most of the, so in that case, in terms of the trend, the youth, the both parties do not have 50+1 of the youth. Maybe around 40% of first-time voters each.
So they need about 10 more to cross.
If they want to make a good showing at the election. Then now to voter education, most or both parties, leading parties, have used almost all the traditional avenues for voter education, be it town hall engagement, community debates, rallies,
television,
exactly, social media adverts, or even social media programs, programs that are hosted virtually on social media to try and whip up sentiment, either through their assigns or through their various party structures. So some of them are holding direct Zoom engagement with their branches outside of the country, being it in the Near East, the Arab region, being it in Europe, being it in North America, or even elsewhere on the continent in Southern Africa. Some of them are doing that. Now, that is encouraging because those are the tools available to them. But one thing that is lacking with our political system is that our parties, political parties, are not organic in terms of policy formulation. At some point in time, during their Congress, they used to have a day or two where they debate on policy issues and stuff. I don't know, I think the quality began to erode, and then after that, I think it has become just a mere fanfare and affirmation process.
Or they just bring us a manifesto and say, we are promising this, we are pledging this, and then they just leave it there without that real sensitization.
That participation of even their core, because, I mean, at the base, almost both parties should have not less than 200,000 registered members, for example, across the country. What is the input of these people into the various policies that they churn out? How do they even go back to validate the policy to ensure that these are indeed the policies germane to our constituent, our base, and in that sense can also transcend to the entire country? This is something that we need to encourage our political parties to bring back, because we are in a country now where, not in a country, we are in a world, an increasingly uncertain world, very volatile world, be it politically or economically. And it is no longer the preserve of international economic and policy institutions to actually direct our affairs as a country, be it politically, economically, or socially. And so in that case, we need to have organic policies or homegrown policies that are very contextually relevant to the daily needs of our people.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of ownership, there's a sense of
Belonging.
participation and belonging in terms of how those policies are churned out and how they then portend for the collective good of society. Until we are able to do that, we can't exert any form of influence on the international scale. For example, if the World Bank if there are funds available at the World Bank or the IMF for a certain project, but then we don't have our own ideas as to what exactly we want to use that money for, the World Bank will dictate to us.
Someone else will come and dictate
exactly,
to us.
And that dictation does not necessarily mean that it is what you want or what your people want.
Yeah.
But when you have your own ideas, when you have your own programs that are very pragmatic, programs that are very beneficial in terms of their conception and everything, then you are making inroad towards self-sufficiency on that score. And once you are able to do that, even if you go and borrow, you know that the policy has inbuilt mechanisms to be able to pay back those money, so that the country doesn't become ridden with external debt to the extent that our cedi becomes one of the worst performing currencies. Everything just seems to be skyrocketing in terms of inflationary pressures, and then we don't know whether as a people we are making progress or otherwise.
So Dr. Wrapping up, I have two very final questions for you. How do you think the media can use fact-checking to ensure our elections' integrity are intact? And also, how do you think the international bodies that will be monitoring our elections, how do you think their presence will also ensure some form of election integrity?
Well, our electoral integrity doesn't belong to external actors. It's primarily our elections. Its integrity must come from us. It is our actions, it's our decisions, it is the processes that we put in place, how those processes are foolproof, how those processes are actually germane to our context. That is what is going to guarantee the integrity of our elections.
So it's our own doing.
Yeah, it's our own doing. Foreign observers are just like catalysts in the process.
Like a referee.
Yes, they don't really add anything or take anything away from it. And so we as a people, as a nation, through our assigns, the Electoral Commission and its principal officers must ensure that they put in place measures where all parties to the elections are fairly treated, all parties to the elections are given equal treatment and access to whatever processes and mechanisms have been put in place for the election. They ensure that whatever digital technology they are employing, whatever mechanisms they are employing for voter collation, for voter result announcement, transmission, whatever, are processes that instigate confidence. There are processes that have the full gamut of security measures to ensure that they are free from any form of manipulation, being it from the opposition or the ruling party. Now, with regards to the media, as it always prides itself to be the fourth estate of the realm, must know that its actions are very crucial. It mustn't have a partisan take in this particular election. Its position must be the position of the Ghanaian. What is the news? The news is exactly what is happening wherever you are at any point in time. The news is not what you think must be or assume should be. That is very critical. We see people on radio when they are, and I know most of these media houses will deploy a number of either full-time or temporary staff, volunteers across the country. And there are times you hear them saying that, yes, we are expecting, but we think that. No,
it's not accurate.
It is not accurate. Tell us exactly what is happening, because that is what is going to ensure that people are not overly incensed about what is happening. Passions are not inflamed, emotions are not heightened, and then we can all go through this process as a nation and come out of it as a nation who is ready, willing to rally around a president to drive us from where we are now to a better place, both economically, socially, and politically.
Doc, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been very interesting having you and getting your insight on the elections as well.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, so I've been speaking with Dr. Kafui Tsekpo, and he's a research associate at the African Leadership Center in Nairobi. And we've been talking about election security, tackling misinformation, as well as fact-checking. He's been my guest on this week's edition of Election Decks on GhanaWeb TV. I am Mauli Aholimega. Many thanks for watching.